Welcome all. My name is Joanne Wakeford. Thank you all very much for joining us today for what I anticipate to be a very robust discussion filled with many practical tips that you can leverage today and into the future. You'll hear perspectives from a very impressive set of leaders across the legal ecosystem and also glean a few insights from our recent in-house counsel survey. Today's session, though, is really designed to help you lead with confidence across your function and your organization, even during a time of complexity. Without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce you to Denton's global CEO and our moderator for today, Kate Barton. Kate is leading the global strategy and operations at Denton's, and her strategic priorities for the firm are focused on delivering consistent high quality service to clients, retaining and developing top talent, and growing the business. She has deep experience navigating complex organizations and an exceptional reputation for managing people, processes, and client relationships. Kate, thank you very much for leading our sessions today. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Joanne. Delighted to be here with all of you and really excited to have three outstanding ladies join us today as our panelists. So let me introduce the panelists. We have Tricia Brower. She is the head of legal and compliance for North America at Zenobē. And so, Tricia, delighted that you joined us today. We have Michelle DeStefano, who's professor of law at the University of Miami, visiting professor at Harvard Law School. She's actually up in Massachusetts right now in preparation for all kinds of Harvard events. And I should say Trisha's in Chicago, so delighted, great city. And then thirdly, is Rebecca Dobson. And Rebecca, you're in central London right now, surviving the heat wave. Rebecca is the Associate Director of Legal Operations at Gilead. So you are our panelists and really the main event. But before we get to you, if you could just hold for a minute, I wanted to set up our discussion and talk about a survey that we just recently conducted. So it's truly hot off the press, and we are going to share in the chat room an advanced copy of this survey. And so it's something that we at Denton's really have at the heart of what we want to do. We want to hear from our in-house counsels on what their issues are and what they see as challenges in the days ahead. And so I'm really excited. It covered three main areas, which are what we're going to talk about today as well. First and foremost, the operating model. Second is deal enablement plus growth. Just, how does the legal function enable growth within your company? And third, it's about risk and litigation management, sort of doing everything right, but at the same time minimizing that risk. So let's just unpack the survey a little bit. Probably no surprise to all of you, but on the operating model, most of the respondents said that AI has the potential to help out in a time when budgets are staying constant. So almost all of you said that your corporations or entities that you work for are basically asking you to keep your budget constant, not go up. And yet the complexity and the issues are rising. So essentially, you're being asked to do more with us. And so, but the majority of you said that artificial intelligence could be the secret sauce to kind of get through this. It could be an efficiency enabler. About a quarter of you have seen the value used right. And so you are now, and this is something I hope we can unpack with our panelists. We're seeing people use technology to make their department more efficient. And you're at different stages of adoption, but people are believing it. There were two other things I want to highlight on this. One is, there's definitely nervousness, anxiety over relying on artificial intelligence. You want to do it right, making sure that you just don't have blind trust. And then there was a lot of comments in the survey about how do you train the first year or the younger generation. So there's concern about how new lawyers get started. So, I mean, obviously, we're all talking about these issues, but clearly everyone is looking at the impact on their operating models and how this is changing. So that was the first thing in the survey, and we're going to talk about that with the panelists. The second item was, how an in-house department really enables growth and enables deal making. And so a lot of you commented in the survey that depending on the industry that you're in, there is either more deals or less deals. There's certainly a lot of cash on the side, but a lot of you don't see this as a huge deal market because of the geopolitical concerns. But many of you are really trying to embed more of your legal department in the business units, really trying to understand the business and get closer to it so that you can sort of do the right horizon checking. And so that is a big item. How you're using artificial intelligence to do that. Definitely, we saw in the survey that many are using it to come up with a regulatory framework because there's new laws changing, either getting more relaxed or getting more strict, depending on where you are in the world. So, understanding that regulatory framework, making it easier, making sure it's very connected to whatever's happening in the business is very, very important. On the deal side, some of you are deep in deals, depending again on the sector. And then others, you're doing a lot of shopping, but not necessarily, consummating the deal. So, continuing to make sure, though, that the legal department is ready for what's ahead. And then the third item that the survey focused on was, of course, our favorite topic, identifying and managing emerging risks. So, on the one hand, you're enabling growth, but on the other hand, you're emerging risk. And what was interesting, if you had looked at this survey and the results 2 years ago, people were more confident that they could manage the risk. And so confidence has dropped almost 20 points from 2 years ago. And so I find that interesting. And so, still confident, but less so. And I think it's because we've had so many big things happen to us over the last year from a geopolitical perspective and just many companies trying to grapple with that. It's really causing, I think, agility to be redefined. So in any event, many of you commented that preparedness is the biggest thing you can do, just trying to think through what are the options and trying to get ready just to lessen that anxiety and being super connected to the business. So and that was sort of a wrap on our survey. I think there's a lot of other interesting nuggets, but given that we have these three fabulous panelists, I want to turn it over to everybody. So we are going to get started, and we're going to talk about the operating model first and foremost. And so, Trish, I'm going to start with you. How are you using artificial intelligence in your business model and your legal department? Where do you see it working? Is there any area of the law where you don't think it should be used or you're afraid to use? So, why don't you start to unpack that for us?
I think AI for our legal department, both on a local in North America and on a global scale, is really a kind of an important part of our very intentional strategy with respect to the legal department. I think when we're codifying it, we're talking about moving away from a catch-all execution function to more of a risk and impact-based operating model. And in order to do that, we have to think about all the time. The question we're asking ourselves is, what is my highest and best use as a senior professional on the team? What are the small things that I can take off my plate where my judgment maybe isn't moving the needle? And so you take kind of the everyday commercial contracts, like some of the professional services agreements, you take NDAs. So we have a tool called Luminance that we are able to enter in, basic contracts, and it'll provide a red line. And it's really interesting because over time, the amount of time you spend training the AI to know your preferences, to know your tone. At this point, I don't have to mark up an NDA on my own with Luminance anymore. It knows what phrases I like. It knows which ones I find problematic. And I mean, it's taken a couple hundred, but at this point, and normally I wouldn't be doing an NDA. We have, paralegals and junior level legal support to do that. But for me, training the AI was incredibly important because we wanted to see and pressure test if that was, they could, mark it up, and if it could mark it up accurately. I think M&A diligence is another one, taking 10, 20 contracts and getting a feel for, a potential acquisition target's risk tolerance. And, when you would I'm not going to age myself, but back in the day, we were taking boxes of diligence and like sitting in a war room and just looking at it. And, being able to at least get a first impression, whether it's right or wrong, has freed up a lot of time. And, on a personal level, I have ADHD. Like little details are very, very difficult, particularly if I've been working on a long document for a really long time or like emails. My brain will skip over words. Like a sentence will read to me, like I put all the words in there, but I didn't. And so it saves me the time of having to read it out loud, putting it through proofreading software. I can just put an email into a closed loop AI system and then not be constantly second guessing myself that did I forget some words in here? Does it make sense to my audience? It helps me shift tone. So I'm taking the things that I'm not necessarily providing a value add for and outsourcing it to my favorite junior associate, whatever AI tool I'm using at that point. For areas where I wouldn't use it, I think for me, anything that I think is going to come close to like litigation or a dispute, I've just heard way too many horror stories of people, entering fact patterns or entering confidential information or information that would be considered privileged later into an AI search engine. And like, as much as I want to say, hey, how have courts found on this particular issue? You really have to think about how you're anonymizing it. I would never, ever, ever put something that I think is coming close to a dispute or coming close to litigation into an AI tool at this point until we get much more clear on how you retain privilege. So that's my,
Thanks for that. Good.
yeah.
Rebecca, maybe you add your thoughts. I know you're very deeply embedded in legal operations. How do you see AI being used?
So we're using it across many different work streams. I oversee about 36 different legal teams that operate across 150 countries, and they all deal with very different specialisms. So we're not actively ruling out any areas where we're like, you really, really can't use it. I mean, obviously, working for a pharmaceutical company, we're very mindful of, say, patient safety information and patient information and so on. So it's more just being, like Trish said, very, very mindful of data protection, confidentiality, and just basically applying the training that you had when you were a grad or a paralegal or whatever area it was, and also learning from other people's mistakes where you hear about people. So Trish's example of litigation, where they've taken precedents from ChatGPT, for argument's sake, submitted them to the court without fact checking. So it's not necessarily saying don't do this. It's like, if you're going to do this, be mindful to anonymize the data. Don't put anything in the tool that you would be worried that would recirculate somewhere else at a later date. And also fact check it. I mean, I think everybody on this call probably remembers their first law school teachings of, regardless of what information you find, even if it's in a book, you're challenged to check that and cross-reference it and so on. So it's just actually taking the old-fashioned lessons and just keeping it at the forefront of your mind. But we're actively encouraging people to use AI and adopt AI, and we're kind of putting more of a fun slant onto it rather than a don't do this, don't do that. It's like experiment and play, but be mindful. So it's encouragement, education with sensible guidance and guardrails in place.
Right. Well, that's excellent. I mean, that's what we're doing at Dentons too, trying to be AI positive, we say, and we came up with 10 global guidelines, and one of them is don't forget your old-fashioned training. I mean, you need to own your answers and own the results of however you get your work done, whether it's through technology or AI or not. So that's, as you can imagine, something that we're really, really trying to educate. So I appreciate that. So Michelle, this is what you do. You're talking a lot about this and the books that you've written. And so, what's your view on artificial intelligence and how it should be embedded in the operating models of in-house legal departments?
A couple things. So, first, on the attorney-client privilege issue, I've written a paper. It's already out on SSRN, the draft and the intro. arguing that the attorney-client privilege should apply to an embedded closed system with a zero data retention and non-disclosure provision. And I analogize it to we have a rule here in the States, Supreme Court's proposed Rule 503, that it's an agent just like a paralegal. And if
Hmm.
courts don't like that, then I analyze it to our third-party consultant doctrine, which allows communications with third parties to be covered by the privilege in certain situations. One, if they're the functional equivalent of an employee, and two, or if they're the agent who's helping the lawyer give advice. And essentially, I think that this is going to get worked out through the courts, but I would still be warning people. If the attorney is using a closed embedded tool, I think you have a great argument that, first of all, you're not waiving confidentiality. And second of all, as long as it's for the purpose of later providing legal advice and services to your client, I think you'll have attorney-client privilege protection. And if it's in anticipation of litigation, you'll have work product protection. That's my view as a professor. I've written a lot about the privilege, and I'm happy to share that with you. That said, in my interviews, just recently, I've interviewed 43 senior leaders, managing partners, general counsels, and as well in Law Without Walls, where we have teams hacking on business of law problems. One of the number one problems I'm seeing is business self-service. So, what do I mean by that? The business group in-house are using tools to find out answers to legal questions. And then they're going to the lawyers and saying, well, I don't really agree because, Claude Chat or whatever Copilot told me this, which is a struggle. And I'm sure not a fun conversation. It's what we do to our doctors. But the other issue with it really is the privilege will not protect a business person talking about legal stuff to a tool because that there's no attorney in the communication. So I think more understanding by the business to not
Mhm.
do, Trish, what you were, and Rebecca, what you tell everyone to do, I think is really important, at least for the States and the UK. I know it's really different. We probably have some people out there from Europe and other countries, so and Canada. I mean, the privilege is very different all over the world. But that's what I would say about AI and the privilege. And other review stuff. I mean, I'm a professor. I think lawyers have been not reviewing cases they've cited since the beginning of time. They've been, they see a string cite in another case, they cite it. I don't think, and I mean, bad lawyers, right? They don't read them. Good lawyers are still good lawyering, and they're going to read the cases, and they should, especially because everybody knows now that these machines make things up. I mean, they have that thing called what, sicko or psychophancy, where they try to please us, which you can tell your tool to stop doing, by the way. I just told mine because it kept making up answers about a case. And I was like, don't do that. Tell me you don't know something. So,
That's great. I didn't know that was a thing. Psychophancy.
yeah,
Really, yeah.
like it fancies you and it's trained. The tools are trained to please you. And so if you go into the area where you can tell it stuff, give it context, you can tell it, please do not please me. Please do not say you're sorry. Please do not give me any information you don't know is correct. Don't make it up to make me happy. And you will see a change in the way it responds, at least on Claude.
That's great. That's great to know. But it seems like all three of you are really trying to get people to be an expert in the usage of AI, even, no matter where they are in the stage of their lawyering journey, they need to be, really good at the use of AI. Is that something that, all of you would agree? That upskilling, how to prompt and to use it in the most effective way possible. Maybe just a comment on that,
Absolutely.
each of you. Trisha?
Absolutely. Because I think, where we're going with, legal technology, it's going to be another program. Similar to Microsoft Word, similar to a CLM. Like CLM was such a huge thing like 5 years ago, and no one really necessarily knew how to use it. Or, if you were at a firm like I was before I went, in-house, um, I wasn't sure how, our clients were working or going through workflows. So understanding it, I think, is just going to be, kind of table stakes after some time.
Right, right. And
Yeah,
Rebecca, are you seeing that too?
yeah,
The upskilling?
we're investing a lot of time into upskilling. I think there's a fine line to be drawn in the current time, in that some people are feeling a bit exhausted with AI and they're sick of hearing the same things. And to be fair, I've been to a number of roundtables and panels and so on. I'm like, if you say the same thing again, I'm out. So I'm looking at different ways on how to engage and encourage people to use it, and we're very much trying to keep it light. So I'm focusing more on prompt engineering. I'm not calling it that, but that's what it is. Because I think if I tell people I'm training them on prompt engineering, they might run away. We're calling it Play, and it's spelled PLAI, and that was actually invented by one of my discovery litigation and discovery attorneys, and it was one of the ideas that she brought to me, and I've been working with her to build it out for our litigation team. And we're encouraging the teams to set aside, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's an hour, but protect that time. And we're doing also a drop-in open hours where people can bring their thoughts, feelings, queries, examples, fails. So we're trying to get people to be comfortable about having a bit of a laugh about how AI fails as well, so that we're not glorifying it or saying that it's a magic wand that's going to solve all of our problems. So I'm very much tailoring that approach depending on the team. So with my corporate legal team, I'm trying to tailor the acronyms of the prompt engineering that I'm doing in accordance to their kind of work streams and their day-to-day work. And for the litigation team, I've developed a prompt engineering series around how you would prepare a legal brief. So it's the same way, and thinking about how you develop your prompts in the same way as you would communicate to maybe a new joiner who has absolutely no idea what's going on. Because any success with AI starts with how you engage with it, how you train it, and that's all to do with your prompt engineering.
It's so interesting because I think Plato is the one who said something like a bunch of people have said it, but the right question is usually more important than the right answer. And I mean, that's been since the beginning of time, and that's really what's going on with AI. We have to be able to ask the right questions. I like the acronym review the full thing or review the freaking thing, and it's role T thing for task. F, what format you want it in. I mess up on that one a lot. I forget to say, put it in a chart, put it in a Word doc, right? And then, so so what the is task format, and format. And then what's the last T? I think it might be, it's constraints, but I'm forgetting what T stands for constraints. So you have to tell it, constrain it as well. I think one thing I'm worried about when I hear everyone talk about workflows, though, is if we just take what we do now and have AI do it, I think we're missing out on something. I think we're supposed to be stepping back, something we talk a lot about in Law Without Walls, and problem finding and then chunking it, like mapping the problem out and the workflow out and see how we can do it a different way. Because I think that's where we're going to get the value from AI eventually, is it will do it differently than we do it as humans. But I don't think we're there yet.
Right. I think we're at the beginning, and I really love the point you made, Michelle, that the better the question, the better the answer. And so that's what we've got to figure out, how this technology can help us do even better. And let's reimagine what that looks like. So we're going to move into the lightning round, and in the lightning round, we have a habit. Like, what's one practical thing that you would tell the listening audience to do over the next quarter in terms of their operating model and the use of AI in that operating model? So this is the quick lightning round as we pivot to topic 2. Trish, what would be your nugget?
Do a ruthless audit of where senior legal time is actually going, not where people think it's going. Because I think we underestimate how capacity is being consumed by work that's poorly scoped or brought in too late, duplicative, or is escalated unnecessarily, or is being redone just because the business used previously generated AI templates or work product. So figure out where that time is going, and then kind of back check that against what tools are available in the market. That time is well spent. And I've done one of these quarterly audits, or basically for every quarter since I've started, and it's really yielded some interesting results.
Oh, that's excellent. Thanks, Trish. What about you, Rebecca?
I would say get a variety of different individuals across your legal teams and also your business and do a mini hackathon where you will do essentially it's a mini like design thinking session. So you each put in problems, bad ideas, good ideas. You can discuss, like Trish said, about your audit points, your places where you're having the most time sink, and you come up with use cases. And it's a really fast, engaging way of really coming up with lots of different ideas, but it's not from the bottom up or the top down. It's everybody's got a voice and everybody's voice is important because I can guarantee you, depending on how big your company is, your biggest time sinks are not where the leadership think it is. So
Mhm.
if you allow everybody to have a voice and everybody to speak up and share, I think it's really fun to share really bad ideas. And it just brings life to the session and then apply your AI use cases over the top of that. It's a fun way to do it.
That's great. Thank you, Rebecca. And Michelle,
Well, I love
over to
what you
you.
said, Rebecca, because one of the things that we talk a lot about in Law Without Walls, and we do this exercise where you turn a bad idea into a really good one. And, a lot of innovators start that way, making lemonade out of lemons. So sometimes you share bad ideas. I mean, think of pet rocks. That was a bad idea that made a lot of money. So I think that's wonderful. And actually, in keeping with what both of you said, I think that as a profession, we don't celebrate small wins enough. We're always for the big win, and then we're on to the next one. And with AI, I think we need to be celebrating the small wins, especially given that the research I've been doing is showing the firms that have the most adoption and the in-house that have the most adoption is peer-to-peer learning. So, share it together with each other, but then celebrate it. Give rewards for people who maybe also fail, right? Like Rebecca, what you said. I think that we need to celebrate this because everyone's anxious, as you said, Kate, at the beginning.
Hmm. There is a lot of anxiety, and this can be really helpful. Well, those were, I think, three practical things that people can take away on operating model ideas that they can make it concrete next quarter. So thank you for that. And so now we're going to pivot to the second topic, which is really the legal function in-house enabling growth. And so whether that's deal making or some other aspect of growth that the legal department needs to be sort of the gas pedal, but doing it with an eye towards mitigating risk. So that's the topic. So I think we'll start with you, Michelle. And every general counsel or anybody in the legal function has to strengthen relationships with the business units. What's your approach to that? I mean, you talk a lot about relationship building and having them before you need them. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think uh, being more proactive in having the conversation and reaching out. I think that's the number one thing that, lawyers get busy, in-house are really busy. And I think right now we need to be reaching out to the business and asking them, what do you need? How do you need it? What can I be doing differently? And and also asking them before we adopt all these new ways of working. A few years ago, Bjarne Tellman, former general counsel of Aramco, and I co-wrote an article about digital transformation, and we found was one of the number one mistakes that in-house makes when they're adopting new tools and new ways of working is that they are thinking internally about how their operations work and not thinking enough about how that's going to impact their key stakeholders. So as we adopt AI, that's going to impact our service. And it may make it faster, but is it going to be the way they want it? And client
Mhm.
centricity is really key today. It's the way we'll make a difference. And client centricity is not just great service, it's figuring out what does your client want and how do they want it? And how do you delight them while you do it? And that's especially important today because in-house can't keep up with the speed. So whatever we do in-house, it has to be some in the way that business wants it. So if you're adopting a new tool, a new interface like for intake that's going to impact how the business works with you, test it with them, do it in co-collaboration with them, as opposed to thinking that you know how they feel about a problem and that you're fixing.
Excellent, thank you. And Trish, maybe to you to build on that, where do you see the friction between the business and the legal function? What are you doing to break those walls down and embed legal and, be viewed as a value adder and an enabler?
Think context is really important, especially, considering where a leader sits in their organization. I mean, I'm at a scale up. So that means I have all different types of talent from all different walks of life that have come with very, very different perspectives. So I think for me, the friction doesn't come from necessarily identifying the legal risk. It's where there's misalignment around ownership of decisions or timing or commercial expectations around fast moving transactions. And it's when like a commercial position has already been decided, which means maybe more complex legal structuring, or with AI, now everyone has access to legal information or knowledge that at their fingertips that they maybe didn't have before. So I'm spending increasing amounts of time saying, okay, this template's a great starting point, but here are at least three key things that we need to do to, meet our internal governance guidelines, or here are three changes we need to make because, while this is a great AI generated template, the indemnity only benefits our customer, not us. So it's, I think, getting the business aligned with you and framing legal as a deal enabler. We want to help you get to yes. We want to care about the risks that are going to prevent you from getting to that end goal, and then being really transparent about what those trade-offs are if we don't do certain things. And I mean, I think a good example of that is, just an interoperability testing agreement I was working on the other week. We had no leverage, no real, no real position to go forward on. We were being permitted to attend the testing as a courtesy. So that means we didn't have ownership over the data. We didn't have ownership over how that was communicated to our customer, between two pieces of equipment. One we were effectively a reseller for, and the other one was an electric vehicle. And making sure the business understood, okay, like I can get this testing agreement done. I know this testing has to get done, but then I need all of your agreement, and I need everybody to respond saying, yes, I understand that we cannot communicate these testing results outside of this forum. The one of the integrators has to communicate those results to the customer. We might not like what they have to say. We cannot say that our equipment works with this particular type of vehicle. We cannot share these results with anybody. So just being able to then synthesize that and say, okay, as long as we're all aligned on what the trade-offs are here, and the fact that we are not in the driver's seat anymore if we sign this agreement, the business was very excited, very grateful that we got that done. But it's really just making sure everybody's on the same page, and that, yes, sometimes comes with certain restrictions or strings.
Right, right. So much of it's how you phrase it, right? You kind of get them what they want, but you have to do it this way. So thank you for sharing that example. Rebecca, what about you? I mean, 150 countries, it's a lot that you're juggling. And how do you make sure that the organization is fit for the speed that's necessary that the business is demanding? I mean, so what's your take on this? How do you balance the growth enablement with the risk mitigation?
So I think the growth enablement and the risk side balancing as well, they obviously go hand in hand, but it all comes down to how the business perceive legal and the legal team. So it comes down to Michelle's point about relationship building. So I'm a strong advocate for coffee and cake, and just building them relationships, like Michelle said, before you need them. So we always try and build them collaboration points even outside of the general day-to-day business. So, for example, we do a culture picnic here in Gilead where we encourage all of our colleagues to bring something from their background, whether it's religious, whether it's their country, or something their grandma used to make for them to share with their colleagues. And we get different people in the legal team to invite their business partners to this. So you start breaking down them barriers where people are like, oh, this person's just difficult, or maybe there's like a bit of friction because of a deal. So we bring it really back to the foundations of relationship building, and then from an educational perspective, and making sure that people are aware not only what legal is here to do, but sometimes we do have to say no. We'll help you find a solution, we'll help you find a way around it, but sometimes we do have to do that. But the earlier you bring us in, which is where the relationship and the coffee and cake comes in, the more we can hopefully avoid having meetings for meeting's sakes, or bringing us to one meeting will hopefully avoid having three, four, five, six meetings later down the line. Because if you have a deal that you're like, we need to get done in a week, and there's a huge risk for the organization, then working with legal rather than around legal will ensure that that deal actually goes through, rather than putting the organization in a very sticky situation. So I would say primarily it's collaboration, relationship building, and then education and guidance.
Right. We talk so much about technology, but it's really the
Mhm.
human skills, right? The basics of that relational skills that we all need to make sure that we don't lose sight of. And because I think that truly is the differentiator and having these relationships. I mean, any perspective on how you, especially in this time where budgets are being held flat, and so much of enabling the business is making sure they see the value of the legal function. So, any last thoughts on how you demonstrate that value? Michelle, maybe you start us in just getting people to understand that, like, if you hadn't checked in with legal, what could have happened, or you hate to do it through fear, but more like we were enabling, as opposed to we saved.
Well, I think that historically, lawyers, the legal profession, we're not so good at marketing ourselves and focusing on messaging. And
Yeah.
so, and it doesn't feel natural, but I think it's important, really important for all of us to get really good at marketing and messaging and telling them, hey, here's what we did. Here's the time we saved. Here are the tools we're using. We can't assume they know that you're doing anything that you're doing other than whatever it is they've asked you to do that they're waiting for. And so I think messaging on what you're doing and why. One of the things I've seen corporate in-house legal departments doing is actually branding, having branding sessions, figuring out what is the legal department's purpose. And that article we wrote, we talk about like what company would you be most like, and what are your brand elements, and if you had a tagline, what would it be? And think about that as your mission, and do it with the whole entire legal department. So you're behind this together. I mean, football teams, soccer teams, they all have names.
Yep.
Departments can too. So I think messaging to the business what you're doing so that because they may not recognize all that you are doing because they're seeing it from their perspective.
Right, right. That's really good advice. Any other thoughts on that? Embedding value, Trish? Do you have any comment on that?
I think it's just making yourself visible and accessible and approachable. I mean, it's really those human elements that Michelle was getting to
Yeah.
earlier. I mean, is it maybe the highest and best use of my time to have a 15-minute check-in with the commercial lead of, that is in charge of all customer relations and customer contracts? Maybe not, but at this stage in our growth, checking in with him every morning for 15 minutes saying, okay, this took up way more time than I was intending yesterday. So today, the two of us are focusing on this, this, and this, and then having a broader sync with all of the rest of the department leads, in our procurement and our delivery and our asset management functions. Because just because it is a customer facing contract doesn't mean there aren't other contracts or regulatory issues that also need to be prioritized. So we are really just kind of focusing on being a team and, getting involved early in those discussions and making sure that we're accessible. It has really gone a long way. Sometimes just showing up is 75% of it.
Right. It's true. Becca, any final thoughts on this?
I think, to be fair, I think it's already been covered, the showing
Yeah.
up and making sure that you're heard, but also, and again, Michelle covered this from a marketing perspective, but sometimes you have to champion yourself. I've been sat in meetings with the business, and it might have even been like a town hall level meeting. They've been talking about this deal that they've got over the line, how impactful it is for our patients, how it's impactful it is for our business, and not once have they mentioned the role that legal has played in that.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think you also have to be a little bit bold and say to the, maybe not in the meeting at the time, but say, oh, if you're going to do a presentation in that, it'd be really great if you shouted out, for example, Trish, I'm going to use you. Trish has been wonderful in this deal. If it wasn't for Trish, this wouldn't have happened. So really want to showcase the value that and expertise that Trish brought. And because of this, we were able to do this deal in 6 weeks rather than 6 months, something along them lines. And even just communicating and asking the business to do that will go a long way for building that collaboration and the relationships and showcasing legal's value.
Absolutely. You know, in my earlier years, I read this book, Toot Your Own Horn Without Blowing It. And there were some really good nuggets, but it sounds like everybody kind of needs to do more of that on the marketing and how do you know, you don't want to really necessarily do this, but you have to, and make sure that your group's efforts are known. So why don't we move to the lightning round? This is just one practical piece of advice that somebody could do in the next quarter to enable growth in their company if they're sitting and listening to this. What would you recommend? Trish, we'll start with you.
I think, again, it's just being mercenary about those priorities. Like legal is typically a finite resource, and different to being in a law firm, we are, I'll use the hated term, cost center. So I think like just making sure that everyone is aligned on what those priorities are, and figuring out the best ways to communicate that is the first step, especially for a scaling organization.
Perfect. Thank you. Rebecca?
I would say alignment. So alignment between legal, alignment through the business, and especially from leadership. So alignment on goals, objectives, and agree what good looks like. If you can do that, I think you're halfway there.
Perfect. And Michelle, your lightning round?
I guess I would play off of Rebecca's and and in order to get that alignment, I'm a big believer that people think they're actually solving the same problem, and yet they're all on a different problem plane, vertically separated. So I would have everyone write down what problem are we focusing on and who are we solving it for and why does it matter? And just see if you're all in agreement. Those three questions really help you see where people don't align. Like if you see the misalignment there, that helps, I think, you attack the problem differently and get together to collaborate in a way that you can find a good solution.
Excellent advice, all three of you. That's terrific. Well, why don't we pivot to the last topic? I mean, I would say that this period of time feels like there is more risk in doing business than maybe we've ever seen. Although sometimes I wonder, is that just always the human condition? Whatever you're living through seems like, it's the most risky time. There's always been geopolitical situations, cyber risk that's at an all-time high, supply chain disruptions because of tariffs, everything. So the business climate is what it is. Again, I think it's creating more demand on the legal function as a result. But, what are you doing, Trish? Let's start with you, to really understand and make sure that there's clear ownership of the risk, and that people understand when you mean no, why and how like a no is delivered within your organization by your department.
That's a great question, Kate, and is actually really relevant to an initiative I'm working on right now. So I think, at least in a scaling organization, people see legal and they're like, okay, get me this agreement. And in our particular industry, and especially at where we are in our stage of growth, a lot of those agreements are very bespoke. We are not a template business. We are not a rinse and repeat, send out a PO, send out a service order, send out our standard form MSA. No, it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 long form agreements, including a construction contract, an asset purchase agreement, and then like a charging services agreement at a minimum to get a quote unquote deal across the line. And all of those have different performance guarantees, rental amounts, things like that. And something that we're working on right now is to be very, very clear about roles and responsibilities and who owns what risks and who has the authority to make those decisions. Because absent that, all of it sits with legal. It is legal's fault that it isn't getting done. It is legal's fault that, we are holding up the deal. But it's very clear, or we're making very clear, that when I'm saying no, it's because there is for example, like there's false claims like False Claims Act risk here that could
Yeah.
potentially prevent us from, we could be debarred or suspended. There are federal requirements. There's a SAM.gov registration that we have to do, and we don't have that right now. And we need to get board approval to get that. So if it's in the regulatory camp, or if there's a limitation, an uncapped limitation of liability, that's my call together with finances. It's putting together a very clear delegation of authority matrix, not only for signing authority, but who signs off on those decisions? Because I guarantee you, people look at it very differently when they have to live with a choice after a decision has been made. And it's not, well, oh, legal just said we can agree to it. It's, oh, well, this contract, went downhill, and now we're like really looking at that cap. Okay, well, the business lead and finance made the decision. And so I guarantee you the conversations in the room that we're having around, whether we should increase the cap during negotiations or what we're willing to agree to changes when the business has a horse in the race, and when there's, they have a firm stake in the ground there. We have to share that risk now. It doesn't just sit exclusively with legal and compliance. And I think, externally a little bit too, something we're doing is also putting together kind of like a use policy or a use case for how our outside counsel uses AI, what value-based billing is, how that works, and making sure we're understanding that the outputs that we're getting from third-party consultants, whether it's engineering, whether it is legal in my case, really understanding like where those outputs are coming from and making sure that we understand the value of those outputs. And it showing that intentionality with the business, and you're not just I think being free and loose with the resources that they're working so hard to bring in also really helps kind of bridge that gap.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. Rebecca, what about you? I mean, you're dealing with 150 countries. One of the things I see here at Dentons with 87 countries is, everybody defines risk differently, and, the changing laws. How are you navigating that? Like, what kind of horizon scanning are you doing, or regulatory frameworks are you putting in place that help just again through your operations to help get to the right answers and have some consistency, I assume, so that everybody has like some understanding of risk tolerance within your organization?
So we have huge regulatory teams, which is nice. So they obviously absorb some of that responsibility, but it doesn't take the responsibility away from legal. So one of the challenges that I've been working on probably for about 2 years, and only recently been able to solve, thank you to AI, and my ever-growing curiosity, but is horizon scanning. And we've tried to solve this with our law firms, and our law firms have been super helpful with providing us lots of useful information. But one of the common themes that I get, regardless of the size of the legal team I'm working in or the organization that I'm working for, is we have no time. So there's especially at the minute, things are changing so much. And over on my side of the world, we've got the EU regulations and so on with AI and whatnot, and deadlines coming up. And we recently had some legislation come into play in the back end of last year called the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency legislation as well. And it's what makes it useful information is if you can have it as early as possible. But given the fact that I don't think any legal team's overstaffed, and you've got a million different conflicting informations, is all my legal teams are saying, the solution's great, Rebecca, but I still don't have time to read it. So I basically have been working with AI. We use Copilot in-house, and I have access to Copilot Studio, and I've upskilled myself on agent building and Power BI. So I've been using that across different technologies to essentially build out a horizon scanning agent. It's currently in test, so far so good. But and essentially, I have a monitored and restricted access inbox where we feed information into from pre-approved sources. And then my agent that I've called Athena, she gathers the information out of my my mailbox, essentially, which I've called Scout. So Scout gathers the information, feeds it to Athena. Athena collates the information and then it goes onto a SharePoint, and you as an end user can filter that based on your thoughts, feelings, whatever you're interested in, area of law that you're practicing in, or maybe you're just interested in a particular geographic at the time that you want to be made aware of. You follow that page, you get an update whenever Athena updates the page, and if you still don't have time to read it, you can use a separate agent on, because you wouldn't actually have access to Athena. She's my toy. You just get the magic at the end. So, but you do have access to another agent on the SharePoint page where you can say summarize this document, and then you can see if it's worth your time reading. So it's not creating, say, for example, any additional risk, because you still have the educated lawyer and compliance professional at the end reading and ingesting the information and deciding what's important and what requires your time. But it just takes out that time heavy sink out of the equation, and you can make sure that it's tailored to your needs, and you can change them filters whenever you want as well. And then for our leadership team, Athena is creating a heat map of areas of focus, and I check that. So I'm the human in the loop at that point, and then it goes to our leadership team, and our leadership team would then be able to look at where they potentially want to change or adapt their strategy, depending on the legislative and regulatory landscape.
Wonderful. That's great. That's great. Those sound like really interesting tools and applications that have helped you quite a bit. Thank you for sharing. Michelle, what do you think? I mean, so much of what we talked about early on was like the anxiety everybody has right now because everything's moving so fast around them. And, one of the issues with risk mitigation, I think, is if you think you're going down one track, get super prepared for that. And then there's a curveball. And the curveball is something totally unexpected, which I think all of us could say this has been a year where I'm sure things have dropped on your laps that you just didn't see coming. Your thoughts for, the legal department on what to do in that type of instance. Like, how would you tackle that?
Well, this is definitely the time where we all have to focus on adaptive leadership skills. Adaptive leadership means basically that we're solving problems that didn't exist before, so there isn't a solution. And the best way to do that is the way an innovator would do that. And this has been my mantra and everything I've ever written, which is that lawyers should hone the innovator's DNA, because we need to ask more why questions instead of what questions. And that's not in our nature because we're problem solvers. And yet when we're getting hit a curveball, we need to step back and use the tools that innovators would, which is 5 whys, and focus on multidisciplinary teaming, get a whole group in together, make sure you've got the young people, power of the prodigy in the room, diverse perspectives to tackle the problem and include people. I think our tendency is when we face a problem to not want to share that we have this problem in front of us. And I think the problems we're facing now, we need everybody and all the talent we can get to help solve those problems. And I think that the forward-thinking GCs and senior leaders and in-house like Rebecca and Trish are doing that. It comes back to culture and it comes back to people working together. Because if you don't have that, when the curveball comes, you fall down. And I think that is focusing on that quick like sprint, get that team together. How do you work on this problem? Assigning roles, doing all the things that Rebecca and Trish do. So it's like second nature. It's almost like, combat risk teams today, how fast everything's happening. And the other thing I'd say that Rebecca touched on is bring your law firms in, bring Dentons in, second somebody. Law firms of today are trying to differentiate themselves now that AI is around, and they may have another tool or other bandwidth or other talent to help you as you face these challenges.
That's great. That's really wise. I mean, and any quick technique on avoiding the blame game. I am sometimes so surprised at, like, well, how did this happen? And so much time when you really need to pivot and move to the solve. Any thoughts?
My sister always tells me whenever I mess up or someone, messes up, is we just need to focus on the next right thing.
I like
It's
that.
sort of like no use what's that spilled milk theory? No use
Yes.
worrying about the
You're
spilled
crying
milk.
over spilled milk. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, that's like, what's the next right thing right now? Like, just in the moment, what is the next little thing that's the right? I'd say the next best thing, but I don't mean next best. It's the next right, because that's forward looking as opposed to backwards looking. And the other thing too is explore the failure. There's competent failure and incompetent failure.
Mm.
And incompetent failure is the type that you don't learn from. Competent failure is the type you do learn from. And the last thing I'd say is whenever there's failure on a team, because I've led so many teams on innovation journeys through the last decade, it's always usually one person's fault. The bad apple theory is true, but whose fault it really is the leader of the team. So we have to
Mhm.
own that instead of blaming.
Right. Yep. Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. So lightning round for this section. We're almost finished here. And risk mitigation. What's the one thing you would say in the next quarter somebody can do in a legal department to help their corporation mitigate risk? Something concrete. Rebecca, we'll start with you.
I would actually build off what Michelle just said, because if you can create a culture where people feel safe speaking up and know that it'll be about the thing that what went wrong, not any individual, then the more likelihood that people are going to put their hand up to raise a risk or even bring a problem forward before it even gets to the risk stage. So if you can focus on a psychologically safe culture where people feel like they're not going to be reprimanded or, in the worst case, sacked for speaking up, and
Right.
just empower that speak up culture, I would say that's your biggest risk mitigator that you can do.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca. Trish.
Well, and I'll build off of what both Rebecca and Michelle were both saying, right? Like it comes back, if you don't want to be finger pointing, you have to come back and view every deal that you do, every choice that you make as a team sport. Yes, it comes down to the leader, but take the extra step and codify what roles and responsibilities are and who has ownership of what, because then it's clear that like decisions are being made as a team. There's an established framework, and a lot of us have boards that we have to report into. So the board doesn't necessarily want a throat to choke. They just want to know what happened. They want the why, and people need to be encouraged to come forward, but also they have to know that they have skin in the game too.
Wonderful. And Michelle, take us home. What would you recommend?
Oh, that's a tough one. I feel like it's all been said, although I guess the last thing I would say is we're all moving so fast. And I find when I'm moving really, really fast, it's when I make mistakes. And that's probably one of the biggest risks right now is all the little mistakes that people are making because we're using AI and we're trusting it and we're moving really fast. So finding time in the day to breathe, and that might be go for a walk or meditate, because it's been proven that when you do other things and get yourself out, you get these lightning bolts thinkings in your head, and then you might catch something. If we go too fast, 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 go, 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 serve the business, and not try and take some time to team with our team and take care of ourselves, exercise, those kinds of things, I think that's when we make those mistakes that we could have prevented.
Wonderful. Well, listen, you've heard it all, and I just want to say a huge Denton's thank you to the three of you. We really, really appreciate this. I think our listening audience is giving you lots of virtual clappings, and thank you so much. So, with that, until the next time, thank you again with deep gratitude.